cybersecurity teams are burning out faster than frontline healthcare professionals.
Wow.
It doesn't have to be like this. Your mental health need not be the price of your career choice. That's indefensible, Ganesh. There is no justification for exposing people to that from a psychosocial standpoint in terms of the psychological damage that you can experience just doing your job. We need to be supporting our people. Find the resources, because I'll tell you, it's going to be a lot more cost effective to save your cyber team than to lose them.
Hello everyone, you're listening to Cloud Next, your go-to source for cloud innovation and leaders' insight, brought to you by Global Dots.
Work-related stress is a modern-day illness that affects nearly every sector. However, in the tech world, one segment, cybersecurity, is more exposed than others to relentless pressure, stemming not only from everyday routines, but from the very nature of the work itself. We hear about plastic solutions, perks like bonuses, company vacations, ping pong tables, fun days, free meals and happy hours. But at the end of the day, a ping pong table is just a ping pong table. The things you carry home in your mind and heart aren't sold by any bonus, no matter how it's packaged. The result is burnout, which in the best case scenario leads to midlife career changes and leaving the field altogether. But perhaps there's a middle ground. Maybe if we bring light to the issue, talk about it openly, and give people the tools to manage it, while also drastically reducing the pressure and embracing work-life balance, we can find a way forward. I'm Ganesh the Awesome, Solutions Architect at Global Dots, and our guest today, Peter Coroneos, founder of Cybermindz, a not-for-profit organization focused on addressing mental health challenges in the cybersecurity field. With over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity leadership, Peter has seen firsthand the unique pressures that cybersecurity professionals face. Peter, before we start, what should people know about you? Tell the listener a little bit about yourself.
It's been a long journey. Let's just say I've had my share of tragedy and loss and the normal kind of, we call in law, which I studied, we call them the vicissitudes of life, the ups and downs. So I think, the first thing to note about me is that, we're all human. I'm a human like anybody else. I guess the difference is that from a fairly early age, I did commit to a personal journey on my own development through meditation primarily. And I think as a result of that, I've managed to immunize myself from the worst that life's been able to throw at me from a psychological point of view and even from a health standpoint. But the beauty of these sort of deep introspective processes where you get to connect with a part of you that is always okay is that you do develop, the term these days we use is resilience. In a way, I don't like the term because it implies that something's trying to break you. But really, I guess it's about, do each of us have a center of psychological safety where we can weather the storms? And I suppose in my case, I've had the advantage of, experiencing the storms, but also testing my own development against that and coming up okay. So I guess Cybermindz is really the product of merging the aspects of cybersecurity and the stresses that we're facing and knowing and understanding directly the challenges with solutions. In this case, what we're now using is the IREST, or the Integrative Restoration Protocol, which I'm sure we'll talk about today.
Great. We know that you have a bit of an impressive background in cybersecurity leadership. If you could just unpack that a little bit for us. And then what was the tipping point that made you shift out of that into this mental health challenge field?
Yeah, so, let's start way back. I actually had my first career as a science teacher. And in fact, let me go further back than that. When I was 10 years old, I was invited into my uncle's laboratory in Perth, Western Australia. He was a neuroscientist, and he showed me human brains in buckets. Wow. He was researching, neuropathology and causes of death and pioneering research in areas that later became world leading. But for me, it was this sort of pivotal moment where I came to see the brain as being so central and fundamental, and yet also so fragile, because he was researching, the pathology and what makes us less optimal, more fragile than we perhaps think we are. So I think it really impressed upon me this idea that we've got to protect our neurology. That really is the center of our life's experience, our emotions, our fears, our hopes, our dreams. Within cybersecurity, all of our capabilities are neurologically based at some level. We apply learning to ourselves, but it's the neurological correlates that we draw upon when we're bringing our skills into a situation. So fast forward as a career as a science teacher, I then progressed to into law and did a law degree, and actually was finally recruited as the head of Australia's fledgling Internet Industry Association in 1997. It became the peak industry body for internet in Australia. And it was very early on in that sort of phase of my life that we started to see cybersecurity emerging as a major threat, I suppose, to the whole trust paradigm that we saw the internet, needed to be grounded in. And I think, pioneering work that we did, we had the opportunity to do a lot of, groundbreaking policy work, legislative work, empowerment programs for the internet community, culminating in a scheme that reached 92% of the population within 4 months. And that was a botnet mitigation scheme, industry code of practice, where we would identify and then compromise computers and then notify their unsuspecting owners so they could be remediated. And that drew the attention of the Five Eyes community through the Australian government. I was subsequently invited to the White House twice, actually, and they wanted to implement a similar scheme in the US, which subsequently occurred and ended up reaching nearly 300 million broadband users, internet users in the States. So what that showed me, though, Ganesh, is that you can have a good idea. If your intentions are correct and your passion is there and you've thought through, how to implement, then you can actually have a disproportionate impact on humanity, as it were. And I guess moving across into Cybermindz and leaving that role in 2011, I was seeing more and more stress and burnout affecting my professional peers because I'd had this resilience through my own personal practices. I saw the opportunity to merge the two, and actually that was really the birth of Cybermindz, is to bring in the best of what we understand around neuroscience-based, scientifically based, measurable interventions that we can apply to our own lives. And hopefully the promise or the aim is to lift societal resilience by improving the capacity of our defenders to firstly remain in their roles, not to burn out, and also to be performing at their peak in a way that they find the job satisfying and that they're able to switch off. Their relationships improve. We see the whole array of benefits that come through a proper orientation to our work. And I think it's these, we could call them, brain technologies that we're applying internally on a regular basis through the programs that we run. And we're seeing amazing effects and successes already. So I think that's really a pretty short version of how I got to where I am and what Cybermindz is. And now we're about to launch in France. We've launched in Australia, the US, and the UK already in under 2 years. So we're growing rapidly. There's a massive need, of course, as we recognize, but also we're really happy to move the conversation beyond everything that's wrong and broken in cybersecurity at the human level into, well, let's now focus on what we can do together as a community to actually improve the situation.
It's super great work, very interesting, and I purposefully kept myself naive so that I could hear it live through this podcast. And I've been in cyber for roughly 20 years or so, and I've seen this burnout everywhere. And, hands up, experienced the burnout myself. It caused me to have a career change in my trajectory, which is how I ended up in my current role, and then eventually how I ended up speaking to you now, actually. And I actually wonder how other people handle it. I mean, I have a ridiculous morning routine that involves making sure I plant my feet on the ground. I do breath work. I do some yoga some days, some running, some gym. I make sure, all these things, pills, supplements, lion's mane to improve the brain. and I still, touch the edge of burnout. And, I feel like I'm at the very high end of people who are looking after my brain and my body. So super keen to see what the Cybermindz solution is. And you mentioned your integrative restoration protocol, and unpack it for us, and specifically how this is helping cybersecurity professionals.
So during COVID, because we couldn't travel, I took the opportunity to invest in some further personal development work and training. And I had been aware of the iRest, or the integrative restoration protocol, that had been developed by Dr. Richard Miller, a clinical psychologist in California, also a long-term meditation practitioner and yoga teacher. And Richard had managed to integrate the best of what these ancient sort of mind technologies were able to give us with modern clinical psychological interventions. And he created this amazing, powerful protocol. It is a 10-step sequence of progressive relaxation, taking you deep, deep, deep down into levels on the edge of sleep. And there you can begin to process unprocessed emotions, unprocessed or beliefs that might be limiting you, limiting beliefs, trauma that might be there from even from childhood in some cases. We're carrying a lot of stuff in our subconscious mind that we're not aware of by definition. It's subconscious, so it's beneath the surface. And as a result, these unprocessed sort of forces within us are available to be triggered. And I think burnout exacerbates that, in the sense that your level of psychological resilience and, in a sense, your own immunity at a psychological level starts to wear a bit thin. And so these unprocessed forces are able to break through and start to call the shots, as it were, in your life. If you're in a breach situation, which we see quite a bit, you'll actually see cyber teams undergoing trauma. They'll be experiencing trauma. And so it's super important in a contextual way to be able to bring them the relief that they need while the breach is going down, or at least immediately after it's happened. Otherwise, they're actually going to be psychologically damaged in a way that trauma does not auto-resolve. Trauma generally needs some form of intervention to clear it out. You can heal it. And Richard Miller showed that. So when he took his protocol into the US military in 2004 with veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan that were returning from quite, how would you describe a war zone in those cases? I mean, something that is, I think the figure is roughly around 1/3, 30% of returning veterans are carrying some form of post-trauma, PTSD. So clearly, you're taking this fragile neurology into a situation that is completely jarring to it. And unless you work with the trauma, then you are going to end up with serious, pathologies there. So Richard's technique was able to restore people at the highest level of trauma down to subclinical levels within about a month, which is phenomenal. And so during COVID, I became a facilitator. I became a level 2 facilitator and began to introduce this protocol into cybersecurity, but with Richard's guidance and help and support. And I work directly with him now. He's actually one of our directors in the US in Cybermindz. Richard has been very generous and has enabled us to customize the protocol with the language and the culture of cybersecurity, so that the advantage of that is that when we're coming in, the programs we run are very much peer informed. And so the teams that we work with, cyber teams and those who support them, maybe adjacent professions within IT or wherever, are all feeling like we understand them. And so you don't have the traditional stigma with other forms of mental health care support. Instead, it's like talking to like. Well, our facilitators are given induction through cybersecurity, and so as a result, we get very high levels of engagement. And as a result, we're able to get good results because it's something people want to do, because they feel, well, definitely they feel immediate positive effects, but they also see that we are like them. We are cyber professionals, and we've done the work to optimize our own minds, as it were, and now we're helping them as well. So that's sort of very high level what we're doing. In terms of the protocol itself, as I said, it's a progressive set of relaxation exercises as a guided practice. So we do it with with our groups. We also provide recordings to the groups that we've worked with so they can go on and become independent practitioners. We have micro practices that they can use opportunistically, but we've also got a very strategic approach around prevention. So the end result of all this is teams that are performing better, that are happier, have increased morale. We're helping the leaders directly because often it's the leaders that are coming to us themselves. They are sometimes facing the greatest stresses. It's very lonely to be a CISO. Any kind of leadership role, I know that from my own leadership career. They say it's lonely at the top. It definitely is. And I think this sense of isolation and, being at the pointy end of things is very taxing. And so we work with the leaders and their teams. And I think it's very powerful when the teams see their leaders showing some vulnerability. We realize that we're all human, but that is actually the leaders are the greatest role models to bring in and show when they are prepared to do the work on themselves and get themselves healthy again, then that's a great incentive for the team to follow suit. So that's really the vision here, Ganesh, is we're sort of imagining and creating a world, I believe, where resilience, human resilience at the neurological level becomes a key tool in the toolkit of cyber defenders alongside technology solutions and training programs around end user behavioral change, which is also important. But unless the defenders are themselves resilient, then I think the organization remains at risk. And I think in many cases we want to change the narrative around this away from wellness, which is important, but really into the language of risk reduction. Because ultimately, when an organization commits to resourcing programs like this, they need to find the resources to fund this work. But the ROI is massive because you're now having less churn, skills loss due to burnout. You're losing less corporate memory around, how the systems are all operating, that people leave. A lot of the stuff isn't documented. And so you add all that up, you don't have the costs of rehiring, recruitment costs. And of course, you've got a cohesive team that is performing at peak. All of those things go to reduce the risk posture of the organization. So it's a very worthwhile investment, even from a risk standpoint.
Yeah, I love the way you can tie that back to an actual solid investment for the company. Information loss is very, very real. I've seen that and been part of that. The technique itself sounds unbelievably fascinating because, we don't have a great way of getting rid of trauma as humans. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the idea that if a deer is being chased by a predator, it runs away and then it deals with its cortisol and shakes it all out. And it's over that moment, it runs it out, but we don't do that. We store that. I definitely went the slow path. I definitely didn't get the speed of your protocol. I wish I'd have known about it when I was in my depths, because the speed of that sounds frighteningly successful or astoundingly successful, not frighteningly successful. And everything you've said, I completely, I had to stop myself from interrupting the whole time. But when I had my burnout at work and I announced it and I was very open about it, I then had multiple people come up to me quietly and say, "I'm so glad that you came out and said that." And I now, came to me and said, "I had a burnout and this, that, and the other." And I said, "Well, why didn't you come out and say something?" And then there's this shame around it for some reason, as if you're supposed to be, a cybersecurity automaton that just keeps going relentlessly, night and day. What's interesting about this is you particularly focus on cybersecurity professionals, and to the listener that might be thinking, I'm in tech, but I'm not a cybersecurity professional, or I'm a project manager and that's quite stressful, or I'm a whatever else and that's also quite stressful. Why particularly do you zone in on cybersecurity professionals?
Well, there's a couple of reasons, and I have to hasten to add that we do not restrict our programs to cyber people only. So if you're one of those other people that you mentioned, they are welcome to join the programs as well. But for cyber, it's because I have a background in cyber myself, so authentically we can come in with the language and culture because we understand it, because we are born of cyber. Secondly, I think from an organizational standpoint, cyber defenders are probably the least understood people in organizations sometimes. The work they do is often invisible. And so there are actually about 15 factors that we've identified that are unique to cybersecurity in combination. We've measured, or we're doing research in Australia and elsewhere, pioneering research in this area that is showing that cybersecurity teams are burning out faster than frontline healthcare professionals.
Wow.
And I can talk about and that's after a pandemic. So I guess when you add all those things up, and I also just allied to that, they say it's the only job in IT where somebody somewhere 24/7, 365 is looking to ruin your day. You can't think of many other roles other than active combat service people where someone is actually, that you're there to do your job and you've got people that are trying to break you.
Yeah.
And break everything that you stand for.
It's.
I mean, can you think of any other profession, or if you're a school teacher or healthcare professional? I mean, people understand you're doing your best. No one's out to try and break you.
Yeah, it's you are on the front line in the cyber warfare, and it's one of those jobs. I mean, a lot of jobs in cyber, you could argue this, but specifically on the security one, if you do your job absolutely precision perfect, you will be invisible. You know, if 100% of your work is spot on, nobody knows you exist. And it's the 1% that ends you up on the front page of the news because somebody found a way into your system and they stole the bank cards, or ransomware happened, or whatever. It's stressful. And I actually, some people are just naturally built for it. There's no question about it. I met Greg Notch, who's a CISO of a company called Expel, and they are a managed detection response company for other companies. So he's got all the pressure of all of the CISOs on his shoulders. So every single client they sign, he has the weight of all those. And we did a nice podcast episode, but afterwards, privately, I was like, how do you cope under that much pressure? Because you have like 10x pressure or even 50x pressure. Because if your platform goes wrong, you're going to lose all those customers because you can't, if you have a breach, that's it, it's game over. No one's going to trust you anymore. And it didn't have a totally straight answer, which makes me believe he was just one of those people who's built for it. He said, you just have to move past that. You just have to move past that. But for those people who can't just move past that and they take it to sleep, and I'm definitely one of those people who takes problems to bed all the time and stuff like that. I feel like we need these toolkits. And what I also feel, rightly or wrongly, it could just be my opinion, it's ever so slightly woo, and cyber is not the most woo place. If you were to map atheists against job professions, I'm sure there'd be a high correlation between atheists and people working in tech. And then particularly there's a lot of men in tech. That's no great secret. That's a known problem in the industry, and men are definitely the less woo, and any sort of, meditation or self-work, all these kind of things. Maybe rightly or wrongly, I feel like that there's some wall there. Correct me or unpack that thought.
I don't buy it. I mean, the programs we use are all scientifically based. Well, there's actually, I think, 25 or 30 studies now that show that you can map on MRI scans even the changes in brain development as a result of these processes. I think we're way beyond that point. I do believe that was the case probably 20 years ago, but certainly since I've been actively sort of bringing it into this area, I've spoken with neuroscientists in America, Dr. Sarah Lazar out of MIT and Massachusetts General Hospital and at Harvard actually had done the pioneering research that had shown that some of these techniques can bring about neuroplastic changes in the brain. In other words, development of new areas of capability that you can see on MRI scans within 8 weeks of regular practice. So there's nothing woo about this. Anyone that believes that needs to go do some reading and understand that these techniques haven't survived for thousands of years for no reason. They've survived for thousands of years because they work. Just like, running or going to a gym makes you fit. It's a form of brain fitness that is measurable, it's repeatable, and in its absence, of course, you are going to find the normal processes of degradation occurring, because if you put any biological system, whether it's an amoeba or a bacterium or a small animal or a plant or a human, in a situation where their available resources are not sufficient to meet the demand on them, whether it be biologically or in this case neurologically, then that's actually the definition of stress. And you will break, anything will break under sustained, and that effectively is what we talk about when we talk about burnout. As to the first point about these people that you meet that claim not to feel stress, I do think we have to be a little bit cautious about that. At one level, it's certainly true that there are both genetic and behavioral differences in the way that we respond to stress. I mean, at some level, stress can be very motivating. We call that eustress, positive stress. But then there's distress, which is stress that degrades your ability to perform. So while there may be genetic and behavioral people who are stronger in these kind of situations, we have to be careful, because some people are also really good at sublimating stress, and they don't show it outwardly, but they may be actually taking it in at levels they don't even understand, and that in the long term, because in effect they're in a form of denial, or they may be using alcohol or substances or any other unhelpful behaviors to manage the stress, to control it. So outwardly, it may seem like they're doing okay, but you never know what's going on beneath the surface, which is why the protocol is so fascinating, because for the first time, you get to have a look at what's under the hood, to use the American expression. You see what's happening beneath the surface that you may not even be aware of, and you've got the opportunity to clear it out, to actually do the work to process it, or as Richard Miller says, to metabolize unprocessed forces that are operating in the subconscious. And the result of that is I would posit that you could take the most, let's call them stress-resistant person in the world, they would still benefit from this program. If for no other reason, you get a much better understanding of yourself. And so typically when you emerge from the program, you are clearer, you're calmer, your sleep improves. We see that within days of commencement. You have a more positive outlook on life. You're more able to effectively not necessarily shut off that negative voice in your head, but you're able to step away from it and see it for what it is. And it's not who you are. Your negative beliefs are not who you are. Your negative emotions, your anxiety, your fear are not who you are. Who are you? You're actually that aspect of self that is aware of all these things, that observes it. And so we teach them how to ground back into that sense of just an observer state where you can see the wood for the trees. And from that, you're able to restore. And that's why we call it integrative restoration. We're integrating all of these unprocessed forces that, as I said, could be there from childhood. Even beliefs like I'm not good enough. Could be a child. I had that belief from childhood. Firstborn child, wanting to impress my parents or my teachers, and somewhere along the line, someone said I need to try harder. I took that on board with my infantile or my juvenile brain and formed a belief around that I wasn't good enough. And that is so common, particularly amongst high achievers. Very, very common that we have this, or the imposter syndrome is a sort of variant of that. So we're all carrying these sort of beliefs that are driving us. And sometimes they're not relevant anymore. I mean, I know I am good enough. Why is that belief still there? Sometimes I want recognition. I'm not talking about me personally anymore so much. And that was certainly the case for a while. But I mean, you see it on LinkedIn. People are saying, I'm so proud to have received this new certification. So grateful to be speaking at this event. Right? What are they really saying? That I'm important, that I still matter. And in this age of AI, the greatest challenge facing humanity, according to Yuval Harari, is the loss of relevance. And so you see it playing out. It's the ego function playing out. I still matter. So these are belief systems that are being challenged every time we go into a breach situation, every time we go into a high stress situation. It's like, what part of us, is there a part of us that is free of all this sort of narrative, this limiting narrative? And the answer is yes, but how do we find that? And that's what the protocol is sort of optimized for. It's to show you that there is this center of resilience. We call it an inner locus of control. Always fine, always clear, always in joy, in its joy. It's a joyful state, because when you look at kids, I don't know if you've got kids, Ganesh, if you see young children playing, look at the freedom, the spontaneous joy. We all had that. What happened to us? How do we lose that? Is it possible that we can track back and reopen and re-access this spontaneous state of just being? And, does that sound woo-woo? Maybe. Do I care? Not really. Do I want the experience? Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, even, and I, playing slight devil's advocate with the woo-woo, but even only based on scientific evidence, MRI scans, it's a bulletproof history that this program has, essentially, and I think is very exciting. It'd be good to know a couple of things. What if a company wants to take this on, and I hope that you increase greatly in the number of companies that do want to take it on, because when I saw a funny video on LinkedIn literally yesterday, it was for ASICS trainers, but it was about how your desk is killing you and you need to get away from your desk. And it had the free bowl of fruit, and the guy says, "Free fruit? Fuck the fruit." And I just thought, there are so many companies, and this mental health care is not giving you a bowl of fruit, at a ping pong table. So there's lip service to it, but actually this is the real thing that people ought to be doing inside their companies. So what do they, and I don't mean financially, but what time do they have to invest? And
it depends. Sorry, finish the question.
Well, I was going to say, and what's the pushback from organizations? So if, I imagine lots of these guys have got lots of money, they're tech companies, probably money is not such an issue, but taking them out to go and do this, maybe you need a few days off site or a week off site. And then what other pushbacks do you get from them?
Well, the first thing is they don't need to go off site because we can deliver remotely. In our most intensive program, which we call Rapid Reset, which is our trauma support program, which is designed for teams under active breach or have recently experienced a major cyber incident, the commitment is 2 1-hour sessions a week delivered remotely. So, we can schedule around their availability. So that hasn't ever been an issue for us. We've got other programs where the commitment's 1 hour a week. And then, of course, once they've done the initial training and they're shown how to use the technique, then they're given access to the recordings where they practice in their own time. So there's no impost on the organization at that level. There is a cost involved, obviously, because we need to pay our facilitators, and the money is going to building our capability so that we can alleviate more and more suffering. But really, I think the impediments that we see, to be fair, are actually not coming from within the cybersecurity community or within the cybersecurity divisions of companies. It tends to come out of the traditional areas of HR and people and culture, because we're not of HR and people and culture, we're of cybersecurity, but we're coming in with a mental health intervention, which is military proven and evidence-based. and we rock up with Cybermindz and the CISOs wanting to do the program, sometimes they get something from the HR saying, well, this is our domain, right? This is not something we thought of, and therefore there is some resistance there. Having said that, we have worked with major companies where the HR have actually come in and done the training with us. And once they see it, they realize that this is an adjunct, an amplifier of the work that they're already doing. But typically HR or the people in culture teams will be working on things like wellness programs, which are of greater or lesser effect. Clearly in cyber, they can't be working that well for the burnout that we're seeing. And secondly, they bring an EAP or an employee assistance program, which generally is too late for the individual once they get to that point, and there is definitely a stigma attached around accessing that. So I think the way to view our programs is that ours are largely preventative. It's what it's better to build the resilience before you need it. My meditation teacher used to say it's too late to dig the well when the house is already on fire. So I think prevention is always going to be preferred, but having said that, you don't always have the luxury of that. At the very least, you need to be providing support in teams that are already highly stressed. The teams, we can measure where they are on the burnout trajectory. So we do metrics. All our programs involve pre and post metrics, which we provide as aggregate reports to the organization. So not only are our programs scientifically based, but they're also measurable. So you can actually show the net improvement, in our case, across 22 metrics. We've created this thing called the Cybermindz Resilience Index, which is an amalgam of 22 metrics of psychological well-being and resilience, including sleep. And so we can actually show exactly where the team sits. So I think really the message is that resistance is really just a product of habit and a product of institutionalized resistance and silos within organizations. We are now in 2024. We're facing probably the most pernicious state within cybersecurity that I've witnessed in 25 years in terms of the scale of attack, the intensity of the attack, the frequency of the attack, the sophistication of the attacks that are occurring now are not like anything we've seen before. I think anyone in cyber would admit to that. You can't go to a conference these days and it's more of the same. And even that...
I think things are the worst they've ever been, definitely.
I mean, it feels like that. And so whatever we've been doing in the past is clearly not working. We cannot afford to lose a single person out of cybersecurity, let alone CISOs and several members. I know I met a CISO in Europe earlier this year that had been through a major insider attack that took 4 months to resolve, and at the end of it, the team was so traumatized that 6 out of 10 of his team resigned.
Wow.
And have probably left the organization still carrying unresolved trauma. I mean, that's indefensible, Ganesh. There is no justification for exposing people to that. And in Australia, at least I can say, more and more we're starting to see regulation around psychosocial workplace risk. And we would argue that cybersecurity is inherently risky from a psychosocial standpoint in terms of the psychological damage that you can experience just doing your job. We need to be supporting our people. Find the resources, because I'll tell you, it's going to be a lot more cost effective to save your cyber team than to lose them.
Well, that's it. And at the end of the day, and I feel like the biggest barrier is going to be getting company. I don't think the employees are going to say no to free resilience training. They're just not going to. But companies willing to sort of buy on board and take the program somehow as the barrier. But it's insane because it takes so long to train a cybersecurity professional, but people are just, I wouldn't say happy to let them go, but they're just sort of through naivety, just happy to let people crash into the wall as if there's this never-ending supply of resilient tech people to replace them. And it's just not the case. So the work is clearly needed, and I really hope that I will hope Cybermindz becomes a household name, across every country that you launch yourself in. And I can't see that people wouldn't be interested in it. I mean, I could immediately think of a wide network that I'm connected to, that once we make this episode and we put it out, I'll say, hey, you ought to listen to this. And I would hope it would automatically lead to some business for Cybermindz. It's totally an awesome project. Anything else you would like to unpack before we get into some just little bits about yourself?
I think the message that I would like to leave is, it doesn't have to be like this. Your mental health need not be the price of your career choice in cybersecurity. Young people coming into cybersecurity, there are 3 major diversity groups that we are actively recruiting to come into cyber. Women, for the reasons you mentioned before, critically important to be able to bring the feminine mind, the feminine viewpoint, the feminine perspective, which is something we've neglected for so long, and women have such a different lens on things sometimes. And I think given the nature of the battle that we're facing now, we need as many different ways of looking at the problem as we can. So there's the sort of gender push around diversity. Secondly, we've got the Gen Z, or for the American listeners, the Gen Z contingent that we're seeking to attract in. Typically, those are born from, I can't remember the year now, but I think roughly within cyber, we'd be looking at people between the ages of 18 and 26 as prospects that we'd be wanting to bring in. Now, did you know 60% of Gen Z kids are carrying a diagnosable anxiety disorder?
Wow.
And that's due to things like social media, fear of the future, financial insecurity. There's studies on this now that we've referred to. So if you're a CISO recruiting young people, you've got to be aware that they're coming in already with some anxiety even before they start the job. And the other point about that is, the human brain is still developing up until the age of 25 or 26. So if you expose someone whose brain is not fully developed, that may be already carrying an anxiety disorder, into a high-stress occupation without support, then you may be effectively impeding the development of their brain and damaging them for life. It's not because you mean to be doing that. It's because we just no one up to now has been bringing neuroscience into cybersecurity as we are now to point these things out. So does that mean we don't recruit young people? Absolutely not. We need them. They're the next generation. What we need is to firstly understand where they're coming from as they come in, to give them the preventative skills so that they've got the capacity to build resilience even as they're learning cybersecurity. And then the other major diversity group are the neurodivergent, the people on the autism spectrum and other aspects of neurodivergence, who are also amazing in cybersecurity because for the same reasons as the other groups, see things differently, may have the ability for hyperfocus or other capabilities that so-called normal people don't have. It turns out that the neurodivergent also have a higher propensity to burnout than the general population. So if you've got your 3 major diversity groups that we're actively recruiting to come in, all at a greater level of susceptibility to burnout than the average person, and cybersecurity itself is inherently, a psychosocial risk environment, then we would argue that there is a duty of care for organizations, a moral and ethical obligation to ensure that we are supporting and protecting and helping those people to come in. Otherwise, it's like we're leading them over the precipice. Come and have a career in cybersecurity. By the way, this could damage your relationships. You end up with a substance issue, and you're not going to sleep for a few years, and you may end up with some trauma. I mean, it's not exactly a thing that you're going to add to the remuneration schedule when you advertise the job, is it? So
definitely not. And I kind of see it a little bit as just a maturity of the field and I'm sure for many years, people building bridges used to have things land on their head and lose toes before they, mandated that you had to wear a hard hat and you had to wear steel toe cap boots. It's standard across those industries that have had a long, long time to grow into their problems. Everything happened very quickly in the world of cybersecurity and tech. You could argue it only really started with the internet when people could start connecting to each other. And really, things are ramping up and changing so immensely quickly that we haven't caught up pace. So the health and safety hasn't caught up yet to where we are. And, that's essentially what needs to happen. And super fascinating to think about younger generations coming in and the responsibility of companies, because it's not something that even crossed my mind. And I wonder if it ever crosses most people's minds. Probably not, to be honest. So yeah, really, really appreciate you highlighting that. And it's, I could definitely sit and talk to you for a solid another hour, but unfortunately we can't do that. You've been kind enough to give us this slot. We have the DeLorean question, which we like to ask every guest, and I definitely want to fit it in with you, which is, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece or more of professional advice, what would it be?
Trust my own judgment. I think sometimes you have doubt, but I think there's a part of us that knows. I think to trust my intuition. If I'd started doing that at an earlier age, I probably would have made better decisions along the way. Probably avoided a few unnecessary, roadblocks, speed bumps. I think we all have the capability. What I've learned through my own personal practice is that we have access to like a sense of knowing of things beyond what the cognitive mind is aware of. And I think there's even some neuroscience on this, that we are taking in much more information from the environment all the time than we're actually able to effectively process. So where is that information going? It's somewhere in there. Memories are all there somewhere. All this there's a vast, I think Einstein, whether it's correctly attributed to him or not, and whether it's even accurate, said something like, we only use 10% of our brain. What would it be like if we're able to access more of our own intelligence? And I think for me, intuition is the great secret. It's the great hack. It's the ultimate hack. They do say, actually, that in professions where it's rapidly changing, like the decision-making data points are so dynamic, and I think technology is one. Probably cybersecurity would be right at the forefront there. We tend to rely more on intuition than we do on information. In rapid decision-making circumstances, we're going with gut feel. I'd say the best of the red teamers, incident responders, SOC team analysts, any of those people that are performing at peak would be probably tapping into some other attribute of knowledge beyond what the actual data is showing them. And we could call that just simply experience, is another way of saying it. But I think there is some capability that I would love to explore deeper around this whole thing of how do we become much more intuitive. And someone even said to me once that the thinking mind should be the servant of the intuition and not the other way around. If you were really tuned in to life, you would be functioning much more on intuitive knowledge than information-based knowledge, because information-based knowledge is necessarily imperfect. It's only as good as your capacity to identify, absorb, and process the information and interpret it. As humans, that's a pretty deeply flawed process. So I think information-based knowledge is one form of knowledge, but I think intuitive knowledge is fascinating for me. And Cybermindz arose for me as an intuition. It came to me as an intuitive insight and inspiration way before it became, then it percolated down into my intellectual mind that assessed it and thought, actually, that could work. It's interesting, isn't it? That some of our best decisions, or even the decision to make, I don't know, you might not agree with it, but to choose a life partner, a lot of it's based on signals that are not cognitive. It's more on the feel of things. I mean, this is definitely starting to sound woo-woo, but I think you could talk to many leaders who will tell you that the intuition has saved them more often than it's betrayed them. So,
yeah, I think going back to, even you mentioned Einstein and Tesla and a bunch of these geniuses, they always said they weren't their ideas. The things just came to them. They weren't sitting studiously with their conscious mind. It was their subconscious, unconscious, or something else that was gifting them these ideas and this brilliance. And yeah, if we could all tap into that, that would be a totally wonderful place to be. And how much humanity would step forward if we were in that space. But maybe we fell off the woo-woo cliff towards the end there. But it's you're definitely preaching to the choir on that one. So you have my back. Peter, it's been totally awesome talking to you. We can't thank you enough for coming on. Genuinely looking forward to the response from this and the feedback from it. Any closing words from yourself?
If you are in cybersecurity and you're starting to question your own reason for being in the role, if you feel like you're fighting an unwinnable battle, if you feel under-recognized or unrecognized, if you feel that the stresses are just getting too much, take a moment, step back, tap into some part of you that already, the part of you that brought you into the role in the first place, that sense of mission and purpose, and understand that these roles are so critically important now. It's not a matter of bailing out or changing roles or doing something different. I think it's a matter of, if you're really committed to this mission that we are all on in cybersecurity, which is to serve society through the work we do, protecting humanity against these bad actors, then let's work together as a community to support and recognize each other. And then as organizations to support and recognize and nurture the talent that is so precious and that we don't want to lose. So hang in there. Take proactive steps. Don't just wait for the situation to improve. Take positive steps for yourself, for your team, so that we can all remain passionate and even joyful in the work that we do. Life's too short to be suffering, and we don't have to. Suffering is not necessary. Suffering is optional. Pain may be unavoidable, but suffering is definitely optional.
That has to be the most seminal sign out of any guest we've ever had, Peter. So totally awesome. Thank you for that. Genuinely great. Thank you genuinely from my heart for the work that you're doing, not for coming on the show, but for what you're actually doing. It's truly great stuff. This episode was produced and edited by Daniel O'Hanna and Thomas Morvidson, sound editing and mixed by Bren Russell. I'm Ganesh the Awesome, and if you're ready to deep dive and start transforming the way you approach cloud practices and cybersecurity strategies, then the team and myself at Global Dots are at your disposal. We are cloud innovation hunters, and we search the globe looking for the future tech solutions so we can bring them to you. We've been doing it for over 20 years. It's what we do, and if I don't say so myself, we do it pretty well. So have a word with the experts, don't be shy, and remember that conversations are always for free.